to In the Shadows, a podcast where we explore scholarship and discuss invisible student populations in higher education. We are your hosts, Yazmin, Aaron, and Kate, higher education and student affairs professionals in California. We are also graduate students in the Higher Education Administration and Leadership program at Fresno State. Join us in this episode as we shine light on students in the shadows.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to our podcast In the Shadows. My name is Yazmin Colleen, and my co-host, if y'all would like to introduce yourselves.
I am Erin Connor.
And this is Kate Spencer.
Thank you, and we'll be hearing from them shortly after I kind of give you all a synopsis of my research with today's podcast. So in today's podcast, we'll center our conversations and the research around students who were formerly incarcerated in higher education. And before I dive deeper into engaging in the research, I want to talk about terminology. As we all know, language holds such a power, and being able to use the correct terminology when speaking about the student population is important. And so from my research and having asked this question actually to a panel of students, which we'll talk about later in the episode, is that we really need to center our language away from negative connotations, like talking about these students in a way where it's like students who are formerly incarcerated and not so much like ex-convicts, because that language centers and highlights what they've done and not what they're doing now. And it focuses on the negativity around that word and not so much on the student and the work that they're doing while in their educational career. So in this podcast, you'll hear us indicate formerly incarcerated students or students who are formerly incarcerated. And I also want to talk about a little bit about the reasoning why I chose to talk about the student population, as I myself don't identify with this group. It really stems from this past summer and all of the criminal social justice that was happening in the country after the tragic death of George Floyd. And, I kind of went on a binge of like trying to read up what it means to be part of this criminal justice system and what ideas do I hold that perpetrate this negative connotation. And we actually, read an article in class to talk about these students, and it really made me see that, when these individuals are in the system and get out, their rehabilitation is focused around vocational jobs and not so much around higher education. So I was really intrigued to see what research was out there to look at students who were formerly incarcerated and who have returned and are really trying to use higher education as a means to better themselves. And so I want to dive into the first research article that I read was by McTeer and his colleagues, and they took a deeper look to determine how college administrators viewed college students or potential college students with criminal records, and how their perspective on these individuals determined if their institution had an inclusive environment. And really what they wanted to highlight was that the college administrators are key and essentially like gatekeepers for prospective students who are formerly incarcerated, and whether or not they are able to gain access to obtaining a higher degree education, right? Because they're the ones that set the standards and the requirements for a student to be admitted into an institution. And so they looked specifically and interviewed college administrators, and they wanted to gain insight on what beliefs and perceptions they had towards formerly incarcerated students, and really what our college what are their beliefs and perceptions. And so some of the open-ended questions that they asked the participants revolved around what experiences they had with formerly incarcerated students, and how do you feel about recruiting formerly incarcerated students and bringing them onto campus. And a lot of their findings and a lot of the feedback that they received from participants really focused around sexually related offenses and how they were problematic, and it would cause problems on campus, and that college students with sexually related offenses are unable to be rehabilitated post-incarceration and shouldn't be allowed to be on campuses. That was actual direct quote from one of the participants. And another belief that emerged from the study was that administrators actually believe that they're inclusive relied really on a pendulum, and it was a pendulum in the sense that it really depended on the type of offense that was committed by the prospective student to really determine if they were essentially safe or not safe to be part of campus community. And at the end of the research, the authors indicate, they indicate and they suggest that universities should really include in their diversity statements and discrimination clause statements about formerly incarcerated students, and how that is important to have in order to really engage this population of citizens to be able to participate in higher ed. Now, moving along to the next research article that I read, it really focused on this concept of intersectionality that we've kind of mentioned in prior episodes. And it looked at not only formerly incarcerated students, but formerly incarcerated Black men and their ability to adjust and transition to colleges at predominantly white institutions. And what support did they have in these colleges to be able to excel and be successful and obtain a graduation degree? And so in this article, the researchers indicated that there was no study yet that had been done to really look at this intersectionality of formerly incarcerated Black males who are in higher ed. And that it was really this article that kind of helped dive into that research. And it pointed out what I think a lot of us are already know, that the African American community, especially Black males, are disproportionately incarcerated at higher rates than any other race or ethnicity in the country. And the authors of the article talk about how this is in part of the result of the 1986 Anti-Drug Abuse Act, which was a piece of legislation that required a mandatory minimum sentence for cocaine, which is a substance that disproportionately affects the Black community. So here it shows the reader that even the laws that are being placed today, even as far back as 1986, are racially, what's the word I'm trying to say? They're racially incentivized to specifically target a group of people in the community. And in this case, it's the African American community. And it also goes on to, indicate that African American men already have a hard time in society with all the marginalization that they endure, with all of the stereotypes that there are in society. And so it's, they have lower graduation rates from high school, they have low paying jobs, and they have higher levels of employment. And so being able to really look at how we can have these group of men participate in higher education, since they have all of these barriers that they have to face outside of the classroom, what is being done at the institutional level to help them become successful, right? And so in their findings, they had three major findings. And that first one is that participants really did not like and notice that there was an impact on the label ex-offender. And it impacted their interaction with peers. It affected their interactions with faculty and other ways that they can participate in campus activities. They face microaggressions, low expectations from staff and faculty. Labels cause frustration and intimidation, and really it hindered them. But at other moments, these negative labels also enabled them to continue to work harder, which was actually one of the other findings, was that participants use resiliency to continue their college journeys. And they define resiliency as one's ability to achieve positive outcomes under significant adverse or negative conditions. And so it really, you can really see in these two particular findings how the label ex-offender impacts their interactions, but it also fuels them to continue to work through their college journey and be able to become successful. And the last finding in this article was to highlight the importance of supportive networks for these students, and how it wasn't just simply a supportive family member or a friend, but also needing help to navigate, to disclose their background when applying for financial aid, when talking with faculty members about having to miss class because they have to go to court-appointed meetings or have to meet with their parole officers, and even getting medical attention, and how do they disclose that. And so this article really focused around the experiences and barriers that formerly incarcerated Black male students in this particular university face. And I think it goes on to indicate that, or the researchers go on to conclude their research to say that really programs and policies need to focus more on move away from vocational training and really focus their rehabilitation on being able to have these individuals be part of the higher educational system and be able to obtain a degree. And when we think about this group, I also wanted to include a research article about what it was like for formerly incarcerated faculty members on campus and what that looks like for them, because they play a huge part in the student's journey. And so in one of the research articles that I will link in the resources page on our website, it looks at three different participants who have all obtained their doctorate degree, and looking through their autoethnographic writings to explore the meaning of mentorship. And I know I mentioned in the previous research article how mentorship played a huge role. And so in this finding, they explored the meaning of mentorship, and they found that mentorship allowed for encouragement, inclusion, and social capital. And so they were able to speak about how mentorship was a catalyst for academic growth. They were able to find ways to have individuals guide them through this process, since they all participated in what was known as a convict criminology group, is what the research pseudonym they used for the program that they participated on their campus. And it really also found that these authors seeked out mentorships for different reasons. It wasn't specifically that mentorship is only meant for one particular gateway, but it's meant for whatever the mentee needs and is seeking for. So it highlights that mentorship isn't just a one way, it's an interaction for one sole purpose, that it has multiple reasons for it. And one of the last findings that they indicated was that mentors who are multi-marginalized are more likely to want to participate in social identities and protect those social identities of their mentees. So if an individual sees that their mentee is multi-marginalized as they are, they're more willing to help protect those social identities. And it really was interesting that as I was conducting this research and looking through articles, that on our campus, we actually had the President's Council on Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion forum, which was on formerly incarcerated students, and it talked about and really centered around Project Rebound. For those of you that aren't aware of what Project Rebound is, it's a program that helps formerly incarcerated people integrate into society through higher education. So it looks at the ability and programmings that are needed for students to be successful. Project Rebound was created in 2016 on the Fresno State campus, and it has offered help to almost roughly 180 students since its opening. And Project Rebound is found in 5 other CSU campuses. And it really focuses on, again, like I mentioned, helping formerly incarcerated individuals. And I wanted to provide one last statistic before I open the floor to my colleagues, is that Project Rebound right now, currently in the 2019-2020 school year, has roughly 454 students enrolled throughout the CSU system, as opposed to in 2016, it was only roughly about 180 students. And I think I might have misquoted earlier that currently the Project Rebound program at Fresno State currently enrolled about 31 students who are actually enrolled at Fresno State, while there's roughly about 52 students who are yet to be enrolled in the university. So these are could perhaps be current individuals who are in the criminal justice system and have reached out to Project Rebound to learn more about their programming and learn more about how to be a part of this program once they're released. And I know that the 3 of us were able to participate and listen in to one of the discussions that happened during this 2-day forum, and wanted to open the conversation to my co-host about what were your initial thoughts about the conversations that were had at the forum, and then we can start off there before I start spewing like a million questions to you all. What were your initial thoughts about that discussion that was had on that panelist, or any of the research that I just presented to you all?
Thanks, Yazmin. A lot of the information that you provided was actually really insightful. And I think what's really nice is what information you did provide for us. It kind of looks at a lot of different points of view that I don't think that we normally would have necessarily considered before. Like, for example, I wouldn't have considered looking at how college administrators might have a role to play when looking at admitting formerly incarcerated students, and I think the one thing that kind of stood out to me from that conversation, especially when it comes around to what you pointed out as sexually related offenses, is that for me, kind of sets off that there's like a really huge bias in that case. Because then it begs the question, okay, then, who really is allowed at our universities? And I can see part of their point of view coming from the fact that we want to make sure all of our students are safe, and that does play a big role if you think about institution wide and potentially having thousands and thousands of students. But at the same time, to also assume that you can't rehabilitate them, that also kind of sets off a red flag to me. And so I didn't know if anybody else had kind of thoughts on that, but that really stood out to me with regards to that article in particular, just because that just sounds like a huge bias to me, and a lot of assumptions are being made for maybe that small portion of the formerly incarcerated student population.
I do have some thoughts on that. I have mixed feelings about some of the research that was presented. Um, I do think looking at the assumption that all informally incarcerated students are some sort of sexual offender is incorrect. However, I actually do kind of fall on the pendulum of swinging of what was the crime? Was it violent? What type of sex crime was it if it was a sex crime? Because there are very different degrees of convictions. Um, there are different types of sex offenders. There's registry 1, registry 2, registry 3. So I think, the concept that sex offenders can't be rehabilitated is true for some people who are the highest levels. Their recidivism rate is really, really high. However, there are other indications of, depending on what the level of the conviction is, it may not happen again. So I think it really depends. Um, so like I said, I have a lot of mixed feelings about that. It's usually actually not my major assumption if someone's formerly incarcerated. I usually assume it's drugs. That's actually my main assumption if I hear someone's formerly incarcerated. So I don't know. I'd have to research more to find out about that. I feel like I'm only understanding like a very small part of our criminal justice system. That is a very flawed system. I just wanted to point some stuff out. I happened to look it up before this, but I took a look, and in 2010, the general U.S. incarcerated population. So I'm not breaking it down by state or anything, but in 2010, the white population of the general population was 64%, and 39% of all incarcerated individuals were white. And when I say white, I mean non-Hispanic white. For Hispanic population, their general population was 16%, 19% were part of the incarcerated population. For Black um, Americans, there are 13% of our US population, but they're 40% of all incarcerated individuals. So that's kind of what Yazmin was speaking to, talking about their disproportionate rate of incarceration. And then lastly, the Asian population, which it doesn't disaggregate, it's just Asian in general. So it could be higher or lower depending on the ethnicity, but there are 5.6 of our general population and 1.5% of incarcerated individuals. And this includes incarceration at the federal level, the state level, and then also jails, which are county or local districts as well. So I thought that was interesting. And then also in 2015, women make up only 10.4% of the adult incarcerated population. So looking at who is incarcerated is, I think that speaks levels on the kind of issues we're having in our system as well.
Thanks, Erin. And I do want to make a correction for you all as well as our listeners. Earlier, I had mentioned that the CSU system only had 5 Project Blue Brown programs. In actuality, in 2021, there's 5 more additional campuses who are adding Project Rebound onto their campuses. So in total will be roughly 14 out of the 23 campuses that will have Project Rebound. So I wanted to make that clarification for everyone. And going off of y'all's conversation, in particular to that research article, it was really interesting to me as I was reading it. Researchers, when they asked these open-ended questions, it was really just centered around, what experiences had they had with formerly incarcerated individuals, and what were their feelings about recruiting students. And it was, I think Kate mentioned it, and Erin, you mentioned it too, where, perhaps these individuals and participants in this particular research focus solely on sexually related offenses. And it could be too, because the research was published in 2020. There was a lot, and these questions could have been prompted in 2019. And so I think it could have been in the forefront of administrators, with a lot of like the Me Too movement happening. And it could have, I wonder if that, had any, if that, came to their forefronts when they were when they were asked these questions by the researchers. And the researchers didn't indicate, they noted that, the participants veered the results in that direction when they really wanted to garner an overall sense of all informally incarcerated individuals. So I wanted to also bring that up to the attention of everyone, that it was that I wonder what caused them to relate or assume that that's kind of like the first crime that they thought that individuals who are wanting to engage in higher ed were. And kind of like, as Kate mentioned, is it bias, or was it because, the time that perhaps the questions were asked was during a huge Me Too movement, especially on college campuses.
Yes, I agree with you that I think timing can definitely be part of it. There was a lot of Title IX issues at the time, probably when the research was being conducted, especially with the expansion of Barack Obama's Title IX protections, and then they were taken back by the Trump administration, and now they have been put back again by the Biden administration. So I think if that's really on the forefront of their minds, that can maybe tinge what they're thinking. Also, I think we should look at, one of the most popular shows and the longest running live action show is Law and Order SVU, which focuses on sexually motivated crimes. I'm a huge fan of the show, so I will admit that I'm a huge Law and Order SVU fan. But I also think if that's what people are thinking most crimes are, then maybe that may change their attitude and what they think people who are being convicted of criminal activity may be doing. I actually don't know the percentage of people who are convicted for sexually motivated crimes, but I was able to look that the Bureau of Justice reported that in 2015, 54% of incarcerated adults were convicted for violent crimes. And I'd have to know what they mean by violent crimes. Some drug-related crimes are violent crimes based on what the person did. So I would need to do more research to understand exactly what that is. Another thing I looked up and that we could talk about, I realize we're talking about students, but because of the whole school to prison pipeline and then kind of the revolving door of going back in, because we don't set things up very well, we essentially release individuals from prison, very little guidance. They have a very difficult time finding jobs that will hire them. They have a very difficult time finding places to live. And, there aren't a lot of choices and decisions they can make when they're in prison. So essentially, it's kind of not similar, but like in the Army when people get out of the Army, they are so used to be told what to do that when they get out and they return to, typical society, we have so many choices now. And that can be very overwhelming. And we're not preparing our, people being released to be able to cope with those choices. And, we block them from being able to do so many things that I think it would be very almost quote unquote easy to fall back into the same patterns, especially if they don't have any family support or friend support. And one thing to also note is that, there was the rise of the private prison systems, um, especially with federal and state prisons, because of the overflow of inmates we had as a result of drug acts. And that makes a lot of money. Prison labor, that's how when you see things that are made in America, it was most likely, and it was cheap, it was most likely made by our new slave labor. And rehabilitation costs more than prison. So there's a real incentive to not prepare people to go back and become productive members of society. It's really sad to say that, but we have to remember we're a capitalistic nation and we care about money. So unfortunately, I think the whole system just feeds into itself.
Yeah, I think you bring up and highlight some very important points, Erin, and how, that school to prison pipeline is very beneficial economically for some. And how, like you said, I think there's a documentary, and I might be butchering the title of it. It's on Netflix. It's like that's the book. I think it's called Amendment 13.
I think it's called the 13th Amendment or Amendment 13. I'll find out.
Yeah, so it kind of reminds me of those conversations that were had in the documentary, and how it really wants to ensure that individuals who, and in this particular documentary, African Americans, really centered on keeping them down, right? Essentially, like, I hate saying that, like, it hurts for me to say that, but I think essentially that's what the amendment is really systematically a way to continue to create these unjust atmospheres for individuals. And so I kind of want to gear us back into talking about, like, how can we as student affairs professionals help students who are formerly incarcerated when they are on our campuses, and what can we do to help them? Because I think in an article that I read, California is seen as the staple for programs for students who are formerly incarcerated. And in the discussions that were had on the forum that we attended, these students still struggled with a lot of the campus community still having negative connotations, a negative perspective on these students. So I kind of wanted to get your all perspective on how can we as student affairs professionals essentially be an ally for these students on our campus. And, for our listeners, if y'all aren't part of, working or live in the state of California, how it's a question for you all too. Like, how can you all better serve your students on your campuses?
Yazmin, I think you bring up a really good point on how we as, student affairs professionals can really be an ally. One thing that stood out to me when I was listening to the forum, where we actually had the opportunity to hear from some of our students who either are currently participating in Project Rebound, have either graduated already, or are now kind of running their own Project Rebound-esque programs at other institutions. And I think one of the big takeaways that I kind of took from is kind of starting before they're even on campus. And I say this in the sense that marketing such programs at higher education institutions, assuming they have the programming for it, is going to be huge. You know, based on what I remember them saying, a lot of learning about what resources are there at these institutions was all brought by word of mouth. You know, you don't know that an institution has this program unless there's flyers or people are coming to talk at places. And I think if people don't know about the program or you can't share information, that already is going to hurt any type of student who might identify as being a formerly incarcerated student trying to come onto campus and trying to get enrolled. And I also remember one of the students saying, you know, they were the ones that helped me actually get admitted because it wasn't approved before. And so imagine if we had the opportunity to share what good that these programs are doing for these, you know, potential students to come in and get the help, because sometimes even just doing it on their own, they're not going to be successful. But if they don't know what resources are there before they even step onto campus, it's already putting up a wall that says we don't want you here. And so I think we almost have to be a little bit proactive. I won't say fully proactive, but I think at least taking the step forward to being proactive and getting the word out and essentially singing the praises of the program is what's really going to start helping build allyship.
I agree with Kate. In the research I was looking through, I think it's really, there are small programs, not just in California, but California is the main place of focus I've looked at since this is where I live and work. But having courses taught within prison, so even when people are still incarcerated, is great, because unfortunately, a lot of the people who do become incarcerated can already have some difficulties with reading, writing, math skills that are required to go to college. And so already working on these skills that, let's say they even decide they don't want to go to college, reading and writing and math skills will serve you in life regardless of what you do. It will help you in your job. But let's say they decide they either want to go to a community college after release, or they would like to go to a 4-year university. Having those skills can really help, and also it can kind of link them with programs. I've noticed that the community college system in California has the Rising Scholars Network, which was newly formed. There were some new bills passed in California in the last couple of years that had some funding that institutions are using to help formerly incarcerated students be able to attend their institutions. And so there's a lot of counseling, guidance, mentorship, navigating the bureaucracy process, completing their degree so they can transfer to a 4-year university. You know, 70% of all people who go to a community college don't finish their degree or transfer to a 4-year university. So going to a community college is already hard, but if you add another challenge on that, the rates of transfer or completing the transfer degree is even lower. So I think creating these programs, you know, an expansion of Project Rebound within within the CSU system, every CSU should have that program at some point. The UCs, I know Berkeley has one, but it's like an equivalent of Project Rebound, but every UC should have that. It'd be great if private universities wanted to have that, but if every public institution can have some sort of program and mentorship, I think it gives formerly incarcerated students a much bigger chance of being able to succeed, get the resources they need, not only on campus, but even connecting them with social services programs to ensure that, you know, if they're facing food insecurity, if they're having housing insecurity. So I think there's a lot we can do. And I think, you know, to argue when people are saying, oh, that all costs money, I think it shows that students who are able to become educated, get their degree, have help cleaning up their criminal records, be getting jobs, the money is worth it because they give back to the community, and many of them go and work in prison systems trying to encourage people to do the same. And that's really amazing. They're great advocates and they're great mentors.
Erin, I think you bring up a really interesting prospect. And as you were talking, I just kind of came up with this idea. And kind of like you, I can only speak from the context of, living and working within California. In that, can you imagine if we started really bolstering a lot of programs at community college levels where, like you said, I think there's a lot of what we would consider our non-traditional students, so outside our 18 to 22-year-olds, going to our community college systems. Can you imagine if there was like a handoff program from community college to a 4-year institution, how much better we could see that as well, you know, how well that could work out. And I just thought, wow, I don't want to say it's a pipe dream because I'm sure somebody's thinking about it. But I mean, I can just imagine here in Fresno, working with one of our big community college districts and then working with, Fresno State. Can you imagine the kind of handoff and support that those students would have coming to our institution? And even the same thing with the UCs, if somebody from a community college wanted to transfer to a UC, because we do kind of support that. Imagine what that would look like and how successful I think it could be if we also put resources there to have that transfer, so to speak, a handoff. And I just think that would be an amazing opportunity, or at least something to look into if there are any community college administrators out there who are looking for some sort of program to do something like that. So Erin, you kind of inspired me to think about what that would look like.
Yeah, and I saw what I something really quickly. As you guys were talking, one of the panelists in that in the forum that we attended, I believe her name was Victoria. She's identifies as part of this group and is part of Project Rebound, but she's also part of recreating like Project Rebound at Fresno City College through Rising Scholar. So I think like that pipe dream, Kate, that you're talking about, I think I think it's kind of already happening, right? Because you have someone who is part of Project Rebound at a university, also helping shape a very similar program like Rising Scholars at a community college. And it was interesting because I kind of took a look at the website for Project Rebound, and not only do they indicate obviously the information of their office, they also include contact information for coordinators to Project Rebounds at the other CSU. And so it was really interesting to see that the Project Rebound on the Fresno State campus is providing resources for even students who are not wanting to at Fresno State, that they're wanting to be part of Project Rebound and wanting to go to a different university, that they can at least know that they have a resource on the Fresno State webpage. I thought it highlighted some really positive on the work that Project Rebound is doing in their short period of time, because they started in 2016. They have 5 years on of the program, so they definitely are doing an incredible job in mentoring students and providing information that they need, whether it's housing, right, whether it's being able to talk to faculty and help navigate, honestly, the bureaucracy of higher education. And so I think it's really, I think what I got out of that forum is that Project Rebound is a program that's helping students navigate a system that wasn't meant, for anyone other than white cisgendered men, and especially not for individuals who have been formally incarcerated, right? The system has wanted them to not be successful in pushing them out, and Project Rebound is essentially flipping the bird to the system and saying, we're here, we're making ourselves known, and we're ready to help anyone who needs it and who wants it on this campus.
I think one thing that is also really cool, if you look at, I'm looking particularly at Fresno State's Project Rebound, but could be true at the other ones, is the program coordinator, director, as well as the person who does a lot of the casework, initiative work. They all are professors in criminology. So when we talk about our criminal justice system, and it is very flawed in the United States, I want to be very upfront with that, not saying that it's great, but it's really inspiring to see that we do have faculty who are working in this, who want to make things better. They don't want to have the cycle go on and on and on. So I do think, even though things are hard, stuff like this can give hope. And then I would also like to point out that, right before we recorded this podcast earlier today, we found out that Derek Chauvin was found guilty on all accounts. Well, I think he'll appeal it. And I also think, the judge may do things because judges are their own specialness. I think regardless of what may come, that's a big turning point in the conversations we're having nationally about what shouldn't and shouldn't be allowed and how police are not above the law. So even though it's hard because we have such a flawed system, we are having these really important conversations.
Yeah, and I also wanted to point out, because I was like, the coordinator, the outreach coordinator of Project Rebound on the Fresno State campus is an alumni of Fresno State and was part of Project Rebound. And there was another alumni that was part of the panelist. I believe his name was Aaron. Just got hired on at the Project Rebound at Bakersfield. And so it goes to show that higher education makes a difference, and that they can go back into the community and inspire those who are still in the criminal justice system, because a lot of the students who were talking about the experiences heard about Project Rebound while they were still incarcerated. So it shows that the individuals who are part of this program, whether it's students, whether it's staff members in the program, are reaching out, going out to prisons and jails, and really providing an opportunity for to cement the seed, really, to that higher education is an opportunity for them, and that they can, that they have someone who is willing to work with them to be able to start watering that seed and allowing it to flourish.
I think that's why mentorship is also so important, because they're inspiring, where they're like, look, I was just like you. You can do this. And it has inspired, like, I believe Aaron worked with a counselor when he was in the prison system who said, I was just like you, and now I'm looking at this. And now he worked at he worked as a student assistant Project Rebound, got his bachelor's and his master's, and now he's going to be the coordinator outreach specialist at CSU Bakersfield. So it's a good kind of cycle that's happening, because we always talk about how representation is important, and this can be, as our theme, an invisible identity, but being able for them to talk about that really shows that no, you can, like, this isn't the end of your life. You don't have to keep this cycle. There's hope after this. And I think, I don't know, because I've never been in that position, and it must be very hard, but I would think it'd be inspiring.
Yeah, I think it's a kind of go off of our current theme of inspiration and giving back. It really is very much, I believe how they put it was, it isn't about what we've done in the past. It's about what we do moving forward. And you see a lot of these students who are becoming counselors who have an interest in, our social justice system, or who are wanting to participate in these programs because they know just how beneficial they are for students who are in a very similar position that they were in. And so I think, our formerly incarcerated student population is very unique in that I would almost consider them one of our most giving student populations, because they know what it's like to not have the support of even an institution. And then to provide that support can mean the world to a person. And if they only impact one person, I would even consider that a success.
Yeah, I agree with you, Kate. In all of our conversations and how these students are shedding light that higher education is an avenue to help rehabilitate. And I don't even like using that word either. Honestly, I think higher education is a way for individuals who have been wronged by a very racially motivated criminal justice system that wants to target, for lack of a better word, and harm individuals of color in disproportionate numbers. And programs such as Project Rebounds highlights that higher education can provide these students another avenue, that it's an option for them to continue to work on themselves, to give back to their community, and be able to inspire others as they're going along on their journey. I want to thank my co-host today. Is there any final thoughts before?
I would just point out again that the research and sources we talk about on this podcast will be on our website. Always learning lots and lots more. Our criminal justice is super complex, so if you're interested, please check it out, because you will probably work with formerly incarcerated students and not know it. I will say that we had 5 students on that panel we went to. I had helped every single one. I didn't know they were formerly incarcerated. So they truly are invisible and still are deserving of our help.
Yeah, thank you, Erin. And with that, I would like to thank again our co-host for an amazing conversation tonight. And I hope that we all continue to learn about the student population and finding ways that we can be advocates for this group. Thank you all for listening, and we've enjoyed this. We love having conversations about ways that we can help students who are in the shadows and being able to pull them out and give them the spotlight that they need. Bye, everyone. Have a nice night.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to In the Shadows, a higher education podcast. We are your hosts, Yazmin, Erin, and Kate. We hope you enjoyed today's episode and will join us for future episodes. Clear Day, royalty-free music, is provided by Bensound. Visit them at www.bensound.com. Please visit our website at intheshadowspodcast.weebly.com to review the literature and resources discussed on today's episode. Please share any feedback or ask questions by emailing us at intheshadowsinfo@gmail.com.